What would you do if the world turned against you, branding you a monster before you could even understand why? In the quaint village of Maplewood, innocence is a fragile thing, easily shattered by whispers and accusations. 10-year-old Evan Thompson, with his tousled brown hair and wide, innocent eyes, never imagined that a single day could redefine his entire existence. He was just a boy with dreams of becoming a firefighter, someone who wanted to save lives, not take them. But one fateful morning, everything changed. Evan's life was painted in shades of love and laughter, surrounded by the warmth of his family. His mother, a nurse, often sang to him while she tended to her newborn daughter, Lily. The joy of having a sister had filled Evan's heart with a sense of purpose and protectiveness. But that joy turned to horror when Lily was found lifeless in her crib. The village that had once embraced him with open arms suddenly morphed into a hostile environment, filled with accusatory stares and venomous whispers. The air was thick with suspicion, swirling around Evan like a storm cloud that refused to dissipate. As the courtroom doors swung open, a wave of anxiety washed over him. The gavel struck, echoing ominously through the chamber, marking the beginning of a trial that would seal his fate. With trembling hands and a heart pounding in fear, Evan sat on the witness stand, feeling smaller than ever. The evidence against him seemed insurmountable, circumstantial, yes, but potent enough to ignite a wildfire of rage in the hearts of those who once loved him. He was a mere child, yet the weight of the world pressed down on his frail shoulders as he listened to the prosecution paint him as a monster, a cold-hearted killer who had extinguished the light of his own sister. The courtroom buzzed with the gasps and murmurs of townsfolk, their faces twisted with a mix of pity and disdain. Evan felt the heat of their judgment burn into his skin, each incredulous look a dagger to his already wounded spirit. He was terrified, not just for himself but for the family he adored, who were now trapped in a web of lies and pain. As the trial progressed, Evan's vulnerability became painfully clear. He was not just fighting for his freedom, but for the memory of a sister he loved fiercely and the remnants of a family that now lay in shambles. The conflict deepened when, in a moment of desperation and clarity, Evan uttered words that would change everything. "I didn't do it, but I know a secret that could save me." The courtroom fell silent, the air thick with anticipation as the implications of his statement hung heavily in the air. It was a revelation that threatened to unravel not just the case against him, but the very fabric of his family's existence. What secret could possibly justify such an accusation? What hidden truth lay buried beneath layers of shame and fear? As the villagers' perception of Evan shifted like the tides, a courageous attorney named Rachel Carter stepped forward, determined to uncover the truth. With each passing moment, the stakes rose higher, and the shadows of Evan's family history loomed larger. Rachel's relentless pursuit of justice became a beacon of hope in the darkness. But would she be able to pierce through the web of deceit before it was too late? Evan's story was not just about a child accused of a crime he didn't commit. It was a poignant exploration of innocence lost, the desperate yearning for redemption, and the unyielding strength of the human spirit in the face of unfathomable adversity. In a world where truth is often obscured by lies, and the innocent can be cast aside, Evan's journey would challenge the very notion of justice and expose the fragility of a life once filled with light. Would he emerge as the monster everyone believed him to be? Or would he rise as the unexpected hero of his own story? Evan sat in the witness stand, the weight of the accusations pressing down on him like a heavy cloak. His heart raced and he could feel the eyes of the entire village boring into his small frame, their expressions a mix of pity and contempt. He longed for the comfort of his mother's embrace, the soft lullabies she would sing to him as she rocked Lily to sleep. But those memories felt distant now, overshadowed by the chaos that had turned his life upside down. The trial had quickly devolved into a circus, each day bringing forth new witnesses whose testimonies chipped away at Evan's already fragile sense of self. Each lie felt like a dagger, and the once welcoming faces of his neighbors morphed into those of strangers, people who no longer saw the boy who wanted to be a hero, but instead saw a monster lurking in the shadows. As he listened to the prosecution's narrative, a narrative that painted him as a jealous brother who had killed for attention, Evan felt as though he were watching a horror movie unfold, powerless to change the script. Among the crowd was Rachel Carter, a fierce attorney who had taken a keen interest in Evan's case. With her sharp intellect and unyielding determination, she became his unexpected ally. Rachel had her own demons. She had grown up in Maplewood and had witnessed the village's tendency to turn on its own, especially when fear and ignorance danced hand in hand. She knew the stakes involved and the depth of the lies that could trap an innocent boy in a web woven by mistrust. "Evan," Rachel had said during one of their meetings, her voice low and reassuring, "you must tell me everything. No matter how small, no matter how frightening, it might be the key to proving your innocence." Her words were a lifeline, a flicker of hope in the darkness that surrounded him. But even as he sat across from her, he struggled to find the courage to reveal the truth he held tightly in his heart. The secret he harbored was not one of malice, but rather a memory that flickered like a candle in the wind, fragile and easily extinguished. It was a moment from the night before Lily had died, a fleeting encounter with an unfamiliar figure lurking outside their window. But it was shrouded in confusion and fear. Could this shadow be the key to his salvation? Or would it only serve to deepen the chasm between him and the family he adored? As the trial continued, small cracks began to appear in the prosecution's case. Witnesses who had initially testified against Evan began to waver under Rachel's relentless questioning. One elderly neighbor, Mrs. Harrington, who had claimed to see Evan near the nursery just before the tragedy, now hesitated, her voice trembling as Rachel pressed her for the details. "It was dark," the woman admitted, her eyes darting nervously. "I thought it was him, but I can't be sure." Evan felt a glimmer of hope surge within him, but it was quickly overshadowed by the gnawing fear that the tide could turn again, that the monster they believed he was could emerge fully formed from the shadows of their accusations. Would the truth ever come to light? As days turned into weeks, he found himself plagued by nightmares, visions of Lily's lifeless body, and the accusing stares of the villagers. Each night, he would wake up in a cold sweat, the chains of guilt binding him tighter. At school, the nightmare continued. Former friends shunned him, and whispers followed him down the hall. "Monster," they would hiss, their voices laced with a mixture of fear and contempt. Evan wanted to shout back, to tell them he was just a boy, but instead, he would duck his head, feeling the familiar sting of tears threatening to spill over. The only solace came from a new friend, Mia, a quiet girl who had recently moved to Maplewood. She sat beside him at lunch, her presence a small comfort amidst the storm. Mia didn't seem to care about the rumors. She simply offered him a smile and a shared sandwich. But even this connection felt precarious. Evan feared that any association with him would taint Mia, dragging her into the darkness that enveloped him. He could see the way her eyes would dart to the ground whenever someone mentioned his name in a harsh tone. It was a reminder of the stakes at play, the delicate balance of friendship and fear that threatened to shatter at any moment. As Evan grappled with the mounting pressure, he felt the emotional strain seep into his dreams, the visions of a world where he was not just a boy but a protector. In those dreams, he wore the uniform of a firefighter, racing to save those in peril. But now, in the harsh light of reality, he was trapped in a nightmare of suspicion, desperately clinging to the hope that Rachel could help him uncover the truth before it was too late. With each passing day, the tension in the courtroom grew palpable, and Evan's resolve began to waver. His innocence was being drowned in a sea of lies and fear, and he wondered if he could ever reclaim the dreams he once held dear. As the trial entered its most critical phase, he realized that the only way to break free from the chains that bound him was to confront the shadows of his past, to find the courage to speak the truth, no matter the cost. As the trial dragged on, the atmosphere in the courtroom thickened with tension. Each day felt like a battle, and Evan was losing ground. The whispers from the gallery grew louder, the accusatory glances sharper, and the stakes higher. She reached out to fellow attorneys, investigators, and even journalists, seeking any shred of evidence that could exonerate Evan. But as the days passed, new challenges emerged, complicating their fight. A report surfaced, claiming that Evan had been seen arguing with Lily shortly before her death, a fabrication that sent shockwaves through the court. The prosecution seized upon it, weaving it into their argument with fervor, and the villagers, already primed to believe the worst, devoured the ease. News of his case had spread beyond Maplewood, and the once quiet village had become a spectacle, drawing in those eager for drama and judgment. It was no longer just about Evan. It was about the community's need for a scapegoat, a villain to fit the narrative they had constructed in their minds. Rachel, desperate to turn the tide, began to dig deeper into the events surrounding Lily's death. New narrative without question. Evan felt the ground shift beneath him. The weight of the accusations was no longer just a cloak, but a suffocating shroud, pulling him further into despair. The emotional toll was visible on his face. Dark circles formed under his eyes, and his hands trembled when he was called to testify. The boy who once dreamed of being a hero now felt like a ghost, haunting the halls of his own life, his very essence eroded by fear and shame. At school, the situation escalated. Mia, his quiet ally, began to face her own trials. The taunts from their classmates intensified, and Evan watched helplessly as the girl who had shown him kindness began to withdraw. "You should stay away from him, Mia," a girl in their class hissed one day, her voice dripping with disdain. "He's dangerous." Evan could see the conflict in Mia's eyes as she wrestled with her loyalty to him and the pressure to conform. Each day that passed felt like a countdown, and he feared that their fragile friendship would shatter under the weight of the accusations surrounding him. Rachel was not the only one fighting for Evan's innocence. She discovered a surprising ally in Mrs. Harrington, the elderly neighbor whose testimony had initially seemed damning. After a few tense conversations, she revealed that she had seen another figure that night, one that had slipped through the shadows, a detail she had kept hidden out of fear. "I didn't want to get involved," Mrs. Harrington admitted, her voice shaking. "But now I see how wrong I was." With this new information, Rachel felt a flicker of hope, but she also realized the risks involved. If the prosecution got wind of this, they would likely twist it to further undermine Evan's character. As the trial approached its climax, a revelation came crashing down on Evan like a tidal wave. One night, while tossing and turning in his sleep, he conjured the image of the shadowy figure he had glimpsed on the night of Lily's death. Panic gripped him as he recalled the details. The figure had a distinctive mark, perhaps a symbol or a tattoo. The realization was both a lifeline and a burden. Could he risk sharing this memory with Rachel? Would they believe him? Or would it only deepen the chasm of suspicion that surrounded him? With his heart pounding, Evan resolved to confront his fears. He approached Rachel the next day, his voice barely above a whisper. "I think I saw someone that night," he confessed, his hands shaking. "There was a mark. I just can't remember everything." Rachel's eyes lit up with determination, but she quickly tempered her excitement. "We need to work together, Evan. If this person exists, we have to find them, and you have to be sure." As they began to piece together the fragments of Evan's memory, a new sense of purpose ignited within him. He could feel the tide beginning to shift, but with it came the fear of what revealing this truth might unleash. What if they found this figure, only to discover that they had been watching Evan all along? The darkness that surrounded him only seemed to deepen, and he felt the weight of their shared struggle pressing down on his shoulders. Days turned into a blur of frantic searching and mounting pressure. The courtroom drama reached fever pitch, with the villagers poised to deliver their verdict. But as Evan prepared to face the final day of the trial, he stood at a crossroads, grappling with the shadows of doubt and the flickering light of hope. Would he find the courage to unveil the truth? Or would he be swallowed whole by the monster that others believed him to be? The stakes had never been higher, and Evan knew that the time for action had come. The moment of truth loomed ahead, and he had to decide whether to step into the light or remain a prisoner in the darkness. As the trial reached its penultimate day, an unexpected turn of events rattled the courtroom. It came in the form of a young woman named Clara, a newcomer to Maplewood, who had been quietly attending the proceedings. She approached Rachel during a break, her expression a mix of determination and fear. "I believe I can help," she said, her voice steady yet urgent. "I was at the park that night. I saw something." Evan's heart raced as he listened to Clara recount her experience. She described a confrontation she had witnessed between Lily and a figure that matched the description Evan had recalled. The figure had a distinctive tattoo, a serpent coiling around a dagger, something that Evan's memory had finally brought to the forefront. The revelation sent a jolt through him, igniting a flicker of hope amidst the despair that had gripped him for so long. The emotional weight of Clara's testimony bore down on Evan. He felt a rush of relief, but it was quickly accompanied by the gnawing fear of what this new information might mean. The courtroom, already charged with hostility, could erupt into chaos at the slightest hint of doubt in the prosecution's narrative. But Clara's presence also sparked a new sense of purpose within him. He could no longer be a passive participant in his own fate. He had to act. Rachel and Clara worked feverishly to prepare for the next day's proceedings, gathering details and corroborating Clara's account with other witnesses who had been at the park. As they pieced together the fragments of that night, Evan felt the weight of his situation shift ever so slightly. This was not merely a defense, it was a chance for redemption, a moment to reclaim his life from the shadows that had enveloped him. Yet, the emotional turmoil of doubt lingered. What if the figure Clara described was not the key to his innocence, but a link to something far more sinister? As the sun set on the eve of the final day of the trial, Evan found himself in a quiet moment of reflection. He stood outside the courthouse, the cool air brushing against his skin, and breathed deeply. The stakes were no longer just about his freedom. They were about confronting the monsters that had taken residence in his mind and the community. Could he truly trust that they would accept this new evidence? Would they embrace the truth? Or would they cling to the comforting narrative they had constructed? The following morning, the tension in the courtroom was palpable. Evan's heart raced as he took the stand, his hands clammy and his mind racing with the implications of Clara's testimony. Rachel stood beside him, her presence a beacon of strength. She had crafted a careful argument, drawing connections between Clara's observations and the inconsistencies in the prosecution's case. As she guided Evan through his testimony, he felt a renewed sense of agency. Each word he uttered was a step toward reclaiming his identity. When Clara took the stand, the atmosphere shifted. Her calm demeanor and clear recollection of events painted a picture that contradicted the prosecution's narrative. The serpent tattoo became a symbol, a tangible connection to the truth that Evan had fought so hard to uncover. The whispers of doubt that had once tormented him began to fade, replaced by a growing conviction that justice might still be within reach. But as Clara's testimony unfolded, the prosecution's attorney seized upon the opportunity to sow doubt. They questioned Clara's credibility, painting her as an unreliable witness. Evan's heart sank as he watched the jury wrestle with the conflicting narratives. The emotional roller coaster threatened to overwhelm him, and he felt the shadows creeping back into his mind. Would they see Clara's testimony as a lifeline or a distraction? With the trial hanging in the balance, Evan realized that this moment was not just about the verdict. It was about the community's willingness to confront their fears and biases. Clara's bravery had shifted the narrative, opening the door to a truth that could no longer be ignored. Yet, the implications of her testimony reached far beyond the courtroom. It challenged the villagers to reconsider their roles in the unfolding drama, urging them to seek justice rather than a scapegoat. As the jury deliberated, Evan stood at the crossroads of his life, grappling with the weight of uncertainty. The fear that had once paralyzed him began to transform into a quiet strength. He understood now that the journey toward truth was fraught with challenges, but it was a journey worth taking. No longer would he remain a prisoner to the darkness. He would fight for his innocence and reclaim the narrative that had been stolen from him. The moment of truth loomed ahead, and with Clara's courage bolstering his own, Evan felt ready to embrace whatever lay beyond the verdict. Whether it was redemption or further struggle, he knew that he had the power to confront the shadows and emerge into the light. The moment the jury returned, a tense silence enveloped the courtroom. Evan's heart thudded in his chest as he tried to read the expressions on the jurors' faces. With each glance exchanged, the weight of uncertainty pressed harder upon him. Clara's testimony had ignited a glimmer of hope, but the reality of the situation was still daunting. What if their doubts outweighed the newfound evidence? When the foreman stood to deliver the verdict, Evan felt as though time had slowed to an agonizing crawl. The words, "not guilty," sent shockwaves through the room, yet the initial relief was quickly overshadowed by the realization that his journey was far from over. As the truth of his innocence began to sink in, Evan also became acutely aware of the community's response. The whispers that had once condemned him now shifted to murmurs of confusion and disbelief. Clara's courage had rewritten his narrative, but it had also opened a floodgate of scrutiny. Some villagers embraced her as a hero, while others questioned her motives. Old wounds were reopened, and the very fabric of Maplewood began to fray as the townspeople grappled with the implications of her testimony. Accusations and suspicions flared anew, igniting divisions that had long been dormant. Evan felt the tempest brewing outside the courthouse. He was no longer just a defendant. He was a symbol of the town's struggle to confront uncomfortable truths. The spotlight that had once burned down on him now illuminated the shadows lurking in Maplewood. He could see the fear etched on people's faces, the reluctance to accept a reality that contradicted their beliefs. Rachel, too, wrestled with the aftermath of Clara's revelation. While she had fought fiercely for Evan's freedom, the victory felt bittersweet. She was hailed as a champion of justice, yet she couldn't shake the feeling that the battle was just beginning. The prosecution's case had been dismantled, but the community's faith in its own judgment was shaken. Would they turn on Clara, the very person who had brought Evan's innocence to light? As Evan stepped out of the courthouse, he was met with a cacophony of voices, reporters clamoring for interviews, townsfolk seeking answers, and others simply wanting to express their anger or support. The attention was overwhelming. He felt the weight of 1,000 eyes upon him, each gaze filled with expectation, judgment, or fear. He had won his freedom, but at what cost? Days turned into weeks, and the repercussions of the trial continued to ripple through Maplewood. The once tight-knit community grew more fragmented, with friendships strained and families divided over the events that had unfolded. Clara found herself at the center of a storm, receiving both praise and threats, and Evan felt an urgent need to protect her. He couldn't allow her to become a scapegoat for the town's unresolved issues. Evan's newfound freedom felt like a double-edged sword. He was determined to reclaim his life, but the shadows of his past loomed larger than ever. As he moved through the town, he was reminded of the fear and suspicion that had driven him into isolation. He needed to confront the monsters that had taken residence not just in his mind, but in the hearts of those around him. In the evenings, he would often find himself wandering the park where everything had changed, reflecting on the events that had led him here. It was a place that had once felt like a prison, but now it served as a reminder of the battle he had fought. He knew he had to take action, to bridge the divide that had formed in Maplewood. Evan began organizing community meetings, inviting residents to come together and share their stories. He wanted to create a space where people could confront their fears and biases, where they could begin to heal. At first, attendance was sparse, and the conversations were fraught with tension. But slowly, as more people heard about the gatherings, the dialogue opened up. Clara stood by his side, her strength inspiring others to join the discussions. Together, they faced the remnants of prejudice and fear, challenging the community to move forward. The road was rocky, filled with setbacks and moments of regression, but Evan felt a sense of purpose that he had never experienced before. In the wake of the trial, he was no longer just a victim of circumstance. He was an agent of change. Each step he took toward fostering understanding and reconciliation was a step away from the shadows that had once consumed him. Evan was learning that true freedom came not just from being acquitted, but from confronting the darkness head-on, both within himself and in the community he called home. The journey was far from over, but as he looked around at the faces of those willing to engage, he realized that hope could flourish even in the most unlikely of places. The path ahead was fraught with challenges, but Evan was ready to embrace them, knowing that he had the power to shape his own narrative and that of Maplewood's future. Evan stood at the edge of the park, a familiar place that had become a canvas for his transformation. With each passing day, he felt the remnants of fear and isolation begin to dissolve, replaced by a growing belief in his ability to impact the world around him. He had learned that adversity was not just an obstacle, it was a catalyst for growth. The echoes of the trial still lingered in the air, but they no longer haunted him. Instead, they fueled his determination to foster healing in Maplewood. As he organized community meetings, he applied the lessons he had learned during the trial, lessons about the power of vulnerability, the importance of listening, and the strength that comes from unity. Each session became a step toward building trust. Evan noticed how the initial unease in the room was slowly giving way to open dialogue. People began sharing their own fears and biases, acknowledging the deep-seated issues that had long been ignored. By facilitating these conversations, Evan was not only confronting his own demons but also guiding others to do the same. Clara, steadfast by his side, was a pillar of support. Her bravery in testifying had ignited a spark in the community, and it was evident that the bond between them was deepening. They spoke of resilience, of the importance of standing up for what was right, and of the necessity of forgiveness, not just for others but for themselves. Clara's influence helped Evan navigate the complex emotions swirling around the town. He learned to embrace discomfort, knowing that real change often came from grappling with hard truths. The transformation within Evan was evident even in the simplest of actions. He approached conversations with newfound confidence, no longer shying away from difficult topics. He initiated discussions with neighbors he had once avoided, seeking to understand their perspectives while sharing his own. This shift was not merely about repairing relationships, it was about fostering a sense of community that had been fractured by suspicion and fear. As weeks turned into months, Evan witnessed a shift in the atmosphere of Maplewood. The town began to emerge from the shadows of mistrust, with more residents attending the meetings and actively participating in the healing process. The conversations grew richer, the laughter more frequent. Evan realized that the community was beginning to redefine itself, moving away from its past of blame toward a future rooted in understanding and connection. One evening, as Evan stood before a gathering of townspeople, he felt the weight of expectation in the air. This was not merely another meeting. It was a pivotal moment that could either solidify the progress they had made or unravel it entirely. He spoke passionately about the importance of empathy and the power of shared experiences. In that moment, he felt a surge of purpose, a realization that he had become a catalyst for change. His decisive actions were not without challenges. There were still those who resisted the change, clinging to their fears and prejudices. Yet, Evan remained resolute. He understood that growth was not linear, but rather a path filled with setbacks and triumphs. He learned to celebrate small victories, each conversation that sparked a moment of reflection, every connection that began to mend. As he looked around the room, he saw the faces of those who once doubted him now filled with hope. The atmosphere was alive with possibility, and Evan felt a warmth spread through him. It was a reminder that their journey was collective, that each person's story mattered. He was no longer just a survivor of injustice. He was a leader, a voice for those who had felt voiceless. With Clara and the community behind him, Evan felt ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. The climax of their story was not defined by a singular event, but by the ongoing commitment to transformation and healing. He understood that the journey would require patience and perseverance, but he was fueled by the belief that together, they could rewrite the narrative of Maplewood. As he stepped outside after the meeting, Evan took a deep breath, the crisp air filling his lungs. The stars twinkled above, and for the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of peace. He was not just reclaiming his life, he was helping to reshape the very essence of his community. The future was uncertain, but it was also filled with promise. The shadows that once loomed large were now merely backdrops for the light that was beginning to shine through. The meeting hall buzzed with an unusual tension as Evan prepared to address the community one last time. The discussions had been productive, but recent events had fractured the fragile trust they had built. A local group, resistant to change and clinging to the old ways, had begun to rally against Evan's initiatives. They saw him as a threat to the status quo, and their hostility was palpable. That evening, they planned to confront him, to challenge the very foundation of what he had fought to establish. As he stood in front of the crowd, Evan felt the weight of their expectations, but also the weight of impending conflict. Clara, who had always been his steadfast ally, stood beside him, her presence a source of strength. He could see the doubt flickering in some faces, and he knew this was not just a challenge for him alone. It was a challenge for the entire community. Tonight, Evan began, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside. We are here, not just to hear each other, but to truly listen and understand. We have come so far, but there are still those who prefer the comfort of division over the challenge of unity. A voice from the back interrupted, sharp and accusatory. You're asking us to forget the past, Evan, to trust those who have wronged us. What about justice? Evan's heart raced. The question cut deep, echoing the very fears he had faced during the trial. This was his moment to confront the internal conflict he had long grappled with, the balance between justice and forgiveness. He took a deep breath, drawing on the lessons he had learned through adversity. It's not about forgetting, he replied, his voice rising above the murmurs. We must embrace the possibility of failure to fully embrace the possibility of success. His words hung in the air, and he could see the shift in the crowd's demeanor. Their expressions softened. The walls built from fear and mistrust began to crack. It was then that he understood the true power of their shared experiences. They were not just individuals with their own burdens. They were a tapestry of stories, woven together by pain and resilience. But I stand here today asking you to join me in this journey. It won't be easy, but together we can forge a new path. Another voice chimed in, this time from a woman who had been hesitant to share her thoughts. But what if we fail? What if we're just repeating the same mistakes? Failure is not the end, Evan urged, his heart pounding. It's a part of growth. Every misstep teaches us something valuable. It's about acknowledging our pain, our history, and choosing to move forward together. Justice is important, but so is healing. We can do both. The room was silent, the tension thick enough to slice. Evan's mind raced as he recalled Clara's testimony, her bravery igniting a movement. He realized that vulnerability was his greatest weapon. I've faced my fears, and I've stumbled, he continued, locking eyes with those who had doubted him. Just as Evan felt a surge of hope, the leader of the opposing group stepped forward, eyes blazing. You think you can just rewrite our history? You think you can ignore the scars? Evan felt the challenge in those words, the threat that lingered like a storm cloud. He needed to respond, to show that the fight for healing was not about erasing the past, but about redefining their future. I don't want to erase anything, he shouted, his voice rising above the murmurs once more. I want us to learn from it. We can honor our scars by choosing to heal together. We can create a Maplewood that is stronger, where everyone has a voice. The room erupted into a cacophony of emotion. Some were still resistant, but others began to nod, reflecting on the truth in Evan's words. Clara stepped forward, her eyes fierce with determination. We are all here because we believe in something greater than ourselves. We believe in each other. The group leader wavered, the fire in his eyes dimming slightly as he faced the unity behind Clara and Evan. It was a pivotal moment, one that could either fracture the community further or spark a genuine commitment to change. Evan took a step closer, his voice steady but filled with emotion. We cannot rewrite our history, but we can choose how we let it shape us. Let's build a future where our children can grow up in a Maplewood free from the chains of our past. Silence fell again, but this time it was charged with a different energy, an energy of possibility. One by one, people began to applaud, the sound growing louder as they recognized the truth in Evan's words. The tension that had threatened to consume them gave way to a collective resolve. In that moment, Evan felt the weight lift from his shoulders. He had faced his greatest challenge, not just from external forces, but from within himself. He had chosen to embrace vulnerability, to confront the fear of failure, and to forge a path toward healing. As the applause continued, Evan looked to Clara, her eyes shining with pride. They had transformed not just their own lives, but the very essence of Maplewood. The community that once stood divided was now united, ready to face whatever lay ahead together. The emotional impact of this climax reverberated through the crowd, igniting a spark of hope that would carry them forward as they began to rewrite their story. In the wake of the meeting, Maplewood began to change in subtle yet profound ways. Evan stepped away from the podium, the echo of applause still ringing in his ears. and he felt a warmth spread through him. The tension that had once threatened to choke the community now transformed into a shared resolve, a commitment to rebuild what had been fractured. That night, as people left the hall, conversations sparked and connections formed, bridging gaps that had seemed insurmountable just hours before. Days turned into weeks, and the energy from that pivotal night continued to ripple through Maplewood. Evan found himself at the helm of numerous community meetings, each one more encouraging than the last. The local group that had opposed him began to soften. Many members were no longer shouting accusations but were instead sharing their own stories of hurt and fear. They had started to see that the fight for justice did not have to come at the expense of healing. Evan's heart swelled as he witnessed this change, recognizing that his willingness to embrace vulnerability had opened a door for others to do the same. As he strolled through the town, Evan often reflected on his journey. The scars of the past were still there, but they no longer felt like chains. Instead, they were markers of resilience. He understood now that healing did not mean forgetting. It meant acknowledging pain while choosing to walk forward hand in hand with those who had once felt like enemies. He recognized that the path to unity was not a straight line. It was filled with twists and turns, but each step taken together was a step toward a more inclusive future. Clara, too, found her voice amplified in the community's new climate. She had always been a quiet force, but now she emerged as a leader, rallying women and men alike to engage in open dialogues about their experiences. The bond between Clara and Evan deepened, their shared mission solidifying their friendship into something even more profound. Together, they facilitated workshops that encouraged people to share their stories and listen to one another. The transformation was palpable. People were not only healing but also growing closer, understanding that their differences enriched rather than divided them. Meanwhile, the leader of the opposing group, once a fierce adversary, began attending these workshops. His initial reluctance faded as he realized that what he had feared was not change itself, but the loss of the familiar. As he shared his own story, the community rallied around him, offering support and understanding. This moment of vulnerability among them all brought the group together in ways nothing else could have. Evan recognized that the success of their initiatives relied on collective commitment. He learned that leadership was not about having all the answers, but about fostering an environment where everyone felt empowered to contribute. He embraced this newfound understanding, and in doing so, he became a more compassionate leader, one who valued the input of others and celebrated their victories, no matter how small. As time passed, Maplewood transformed into a vibrant mosaic of voices and experiences. The community began to host events that celebrated diversity, showcasing local art, culture, and history from all perspectives. The scars of the past began to fade into a collective memory that was honored rather than hidden. People spoke openly about their struggles and triumphs, and with each shared story, the fabric of their community grew stronger. In this new Maplewood, Evan found a sense of purpose that he had not expected. He had stepped into his role not just as a leader, but as a catalyst for change. The fear that had once gripped him gave way to a profound understanding of the power of unity and forgiveness. He realized that the journey of healing was ongoing, but they were no longer navigating it alone. They had learned to lean on one another, to celebrate their differences, and to embrace the future together. As he stood at the edge of the community park, watching families gather and laughter fill the air, Evan felt a deep sense of gratitude wash over him. They had faced their darkest moments, but together, they had emerged into the light, stronger and more resilient than ever. The journey was far from over, but they had chosen a path that honored both their past and their hopes for tomorrow. In that moment, he knew that the heart of Maplewood beat with renewed vigor, and he was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, alongside his community. As the seasons changed in Maplewood, so too did the lives of its residents. Evan's journey had not just been a personal transformation, but a communal renaissance, weaving together the threads of hope and resilience that had long lay frayed. The workshops and dialogues continued, creating safe spaces where voices once silenced found strength in unity. Each story shared was a testament to the power of empathy, a reminder that every individual bore a history worth listening to. In the months that followed, Evan observed how these gatherings had fostered a deeper understanding among community members. People began to collaborate on projects that highlighted their diverse backgrounds, art installations depicting shared histories, cultural festivals celebrating differences, and service initiatives that addressed the needs of the underprivileged. Maplewood was no longer just a town. It was a living testament to the power of redemption and collaboration. The scars of the past were not erased, but rather integrated into the fabric of their everyday life, serving as reminders of what they had overcome together. Clara emerged as a beacon of inspiration, leading initiatives that empowered marginalized voices. Her passion ignited a movement within the community, one that encouraged inclusivity and respect. The bond between her and Evan deepened, evolving into a partnership grounded in mutual respect and shared vision. They became cornerstones of a community that had learned to embrace its complexities rather than shy away from them. Amidst this growth, the former leader of the opposing group became a vital ally. His journey from adversary to advocate was not just a personal victory, but a symbol of what was possible when hearts and minds opened to understanding. The community had transformed, not only in their relationships, but in their collective identity, learning that opposition could be a pathway to collaboration. As Evan reflected on this profound journey, he felt a sense of fulfillment that he had never anticipated. No longer just a leader, he had become a catalyst for change, paving the way for future generations. He understood now that true leadership was about fostering an environment where every voice mattered and where healing was a shared responsibility. The community was committed to ensuring that the lessons learned would not be forgotten. Evan's legacy became evident in the faces of the children playing in the park, their laughter ringing through the air as they interacted with one another, oblivious to the divisions that had once plagued their parents. The work they had done together was not just about mending their community, but about nurturing a culture of acceptance and love that would guide Maplewood into the future. As he stood among them, watching the sunset cast a golden hue over the town, Evan realized that they had built something much more significant than a unified community. They had created a foundation for ongoing dialogue and understanding. The journey was far from over, but they were equipped with the knowledge that healing was a continuous process, one that required vigilance and dedication. In this moment of reflection, Evan understood the profound truth that had emerged from their collective struggle. The strength of a community lies not in its uniformity, but in its diversity. He felt a renewed sense of purpose, ready to face the challenges ahead, knowing that they would navigate them together. The legacy of Maplewood was no longer defined by its past struggles, but illuminated by the promise of a future where every voice was valued and every story mattered. In that realization, Evan found hope not just for himself, but for everyone who called Maplewood home. The ripples of their journey would extend far beyond their small town, inspiring others to embrace empathy, understanding, and the courage to change. As the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, Evan felt a profound connection to the community he had helped transform, and he knew that together, they would continue to write their story, a story of healing, strength, and rebirth.